wants me to continue. Continue.
Okay. Hand it over to you, Joe, to start, if you're happy to start it.
Yeah. I guess first off, thanks to everybody for coming. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm recording my end from Yorta country today. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, as well as acknowledge any First Nations people on the call. Yeah. And anybody that's listened to the recording down the line, and in general, thanks to everybody for being here. So yeah, I guess a little bit about us in 30 seconds. We're the team behind AusRegen. We're a not-for-profit with a focus on restoring, rehydrating, and regenerating country and watersheds in all the facets of what that might look like. Today on the call, we've got myself, David Ma, and Ali Henrahan. These two are very knowledgeable in their fields, and I'm mostly along for the ride. So we've got a bit of a presentation organised, and we'll be sort of plugging through it. And look, we're not the most formal of individuals, so if there are any burning questions that you have along the way, shoot them in the chat, or if you're listening to this post fact and you've got any burning questions, go to the AusRegen Facebook page and shoot us a direct message, and we'll endeavour to get back to you. So yeah, with that being said, I might pass it over to yourself or Dave or Ellie to introduce yourselves, and then we might get cracked into it.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I'm beaming in from Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country today. I guess, yeah, like Joe said, we're not very formal, and this isn't the most well-rehearsed presentation, because in the past we've tried to go all out and really rehearse these things, but we found that the magic is really just us having a conversation and really delving into the issue together and trying to come up with solutions. So that's what I'm hoping will sort of come out of, the ether today. And like Joe said, please feel free to ask questions in the chat. Apparently I can allow people to talk as well, so I've just found that little feature. And I'll start sharing my screen as well. So let's do this. Share.
Can I just cut in? Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we've got you.
Just having my screen just keeps dropping out, so I may have to switch over to using my phone. I think. I mean, I can see the images.
That's all right.
Maybe better. I mean, it works so long as you can cope with not seeing my face, I suppose.
I'll make lots of smiley gestures towards the camera to cover for your lack of video, Dave. So yeah, look, provided we can all hear you, which I'm pretty sure we can.
Terrible thing that it keeps
You're jumping in and
dropping
out. Like we can sometimes see.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess we should get into our presentation. We've waffled long enough now. So yeah, so this is our presentation on rehydrating and revegetating the landscape and how it will cool the climate. Those are pretty big, broad goals. And hopefully one of the things that we're going to break down for you today is how these things can be achievable, and really how individual efforts and grassroots efforts they do stack up, and they do have an effect on the bigger whole. And that's sort of what we're going to talk about today. So the first part of the presentation is really going to be some of the nitty gritty on some of the science, as well as some of, I guess, the history. When we talk landscapes in the context of the Australian continent, or Gondwanaland, whatever we were, what's led to the process that we're in today, as well as what are some things that have actually been done by the people sitting in front of you talking about it. What are the things that we've actually done to try and reverse these processes, and I guess maybe a little bit of hope for what the long-lasting impact of these things can be if we actually get out there in the stream and start doing some work today. So I guess to the next slide, Al. So the oldest and flattest continent on Earth. Maybe you can speak a little bit to how old and flat we are, Dave.
How old and flat we are. Age is an interesting one, but definitely flat. And I guess putting that slide into context, what it was really talking about was the fact that we didn't have this regular ice melt. Our continent evolved without the system was fed off. There had to be some other sort of process that evolved instead of falling back on this ice melt event. So wetlands really did evolve and hold water back in the landscape. So it basically performed a similar sort of function, I suppose, to oh God, I'm waffling on.
No, it's fine. And look, that's one of the points I remember talking to you about, Dave, is really, what you're touching on before, like other continents have glaciers. We don't have them here. Like we do actually have a different hydrological system. Now, I'm not a hydrologist, so I'm not going to go into the ends and depths of it, but it is a different part of the world. And I think there are very, very unique aspects to this old and flat continent. And when you also look at the fact that it's got the oldest civilization here, and that civilization's been here interacting with this landscape for a very, very long time and sustaining this landscape for a very, very long time. And I think that as we go into the deeper sections of the presentation, that'll come out. But I think that's a really, really interesting fact, the fact that it's not a glacial melt that feeds our rivers. Like we do get snow melt, but there's a whole water cycle out there, or at least there used to be in a lot of places. And what that looks like, I think it's truly unique.
I think, Dave, like one of the best ways, sorry, Dave. We don't have like a Colorado River or like a Nile River system. We have a basin system, like a Murray-Darling Basin, and we've got aquifers, and we've got sort of things that hold water in place for longer, and that's one of our biggest assets here. I'm just going to move it on because I feel like we'll just keep talking about it if someone doesn't stop us. So this is the earliest satellite footage I could get of Australia in 1984. This is what it looked like in 2021, which is, it's pretty substantial, 37 years difference. Just the coloration.
There's two big areas to focus in on there, and that's really down along the sort of the southeastern edge across the Murray-Darling Basin. You see this march of red from the Barker into the high country. That march of red, you can go out there and see it for yourself if you want to go and drive across country. It's old trees with yellow leaves. You know what I mean? Like that is something that's visceral, and you can see it is degraded ecosystems. And we're only talking the last 37 years here. Like this isn't, if we didn't have satellites back then, but imagine pre-colonization to today, what that difference looks like. And likewise, when you look out west, how red and dry it is, out on that country. And I think it's just a really, really visceral representation of how dramatically we've impacted this landscape. And sure, there's a bunch of mitigating circumstances like droughts, the Millennium Drought, all of these things, but largely I think the thing we need to recognize is that these are intentional man-made droughts. You can sit back and blame the climate until the cows come home, but at the end of the day, it's land management practices that have led us to this place we're at now, and it will be land management practices that will lead us out of where we are now.
Yeah, exactly. So even though it's sort of like a bit of despair that's going on here when we're looking at this, but the hope is if humans can push it in this direction, to the red direction, then humans potentially could push it back the other way. So that's what we're looking at trying to
absolutely they can.
So how do we get to this place? Well, essentially when Dave can probably talk to this a bit better, but when Australia was colonized by white people, one of the first things that everyone did was go and drain the wetlands, and remove vegetation to take advantage of all of the, rich alluvial soils that had been, sitting underneath all of those wetlands, all of the nutrients that have been gathering there for centuries.
It's actually it's a great photograph that one. Can we stay on that one for a moment, Elle? That photo on the right. The photo on the right is in Kempsey, but it's indicative of what occurred basically between 1860 and 1940. There was government grants to drain wetlands. It was done for agricultural expansion. So one of the things that they did prior to the removal was measure the speed of water that flowed through wetlands. And prior to their removal, it was taking 100 days. And once they did this channelization, it took 6 days to drain the water from that wetland. So basically, they're akin to a plug in the sink. They kind of pressurize the water in the upstream and prevent the rapid movement out of the soil and from the headwaters above. So, 98% of the plugs that held all of this water back, and basically we've drained entire landscapes as a result. And this was one of the big collapse. This would have caused a major collapse cycle in ecology systems, and prevented. Water is what governs the ecological processes. So if they're going to advance, you have to have water in the system. So essentially, our systems are really quite trapped in this ecological successional process as a result of these things that happened many years ago that never changed. Wherever we go today across wetlands, you can see these major cuts through them. Anyway.
Yeah.
Maybe that's enough.
So essentially what you're saying, Dave, is we're stuck in like an artificial drought where even if it does rain inland, the water is drained away faster than it could be soaked in and do anything.
100%. 100%. These are the liver and kidneys in the arterial system. They're meant to trap all of the organic matter that moves through. Any water that moves through a wetland is cleaner when it comes out the other side. It's processing all of that material, and the landscape's actually growing. We're not meant to wash all of that fertility into the ocean every time it rains, and it's that's all of our soil being washed. It's a big one. We coat the barrier reef in a dose of soil every time there's a big rain event up there. There's all sorts of implications that.
So I guess this is the legacy that we live with, and it seems kind of normal for someone born in the 1990s like me, sort of walk around looking at a landscape like, oh, well, this is just how it's supposed to be. But after sort of understanding everything that Dave has taught me and Joe, and there's people overseas doing this sort of restoration stuff as well, and in Australia, like once you start to look at the landscape in this way, you can just see it everywhere, all of this kind of man-made degradation that's just self-perpetuating now because the landscape has no way to pull itself out of this cycle. And Dave, these are new slides for Dave and Joe, so they are sort of sitting there like, what?
No, that's great. That's a great image. It's a chain of palms. Perfect.
Yeah.
The early explorers. That's what they were referring to. We didn't do science back then, but we did. But in the landscape, a lot of things were going on out there that we hadn't really no understanding of. And when the early explorers were talk about when they first came across these landscapes, they said this is nothing like what we're used to in Britain, or in Europe. We don't see this sort of. It was totally unfamiliar to them, but it was a predominant way that floodplains looked. And there's not very many of these left anymore. They're a very rare kind of, but we can recreate them. That's the trick. We know enough how to rebuild them.
So I guess, yeah, these two screenshots come from an animation, but it just goes to show that like once these systems, the sort of plug has been ripped out of a system, like what Dave was saying, this is sort of a lot more familiar to us.
Sorry, I'll just skip back to that other one for a second.
Yeah.
So what in the explorers reports, what they're saying basically is that ground between the two ponds, see that grassy area between the two ponds. When they introduced the animals and significant numbers, the ground between the ponds was the most fertile plant material, and the animals just sniffed it out and went in there and chewed it out, right? And then the heavy rains came and eroded the ground between the ponds. So basically we have rivers like that one in that image, right, where before we had ponds. And, you know, it might be a little bit controversial, but you know, it's been said that we didn't have as many rivers in this country as we do today. It's as a result of that.
All right, well, this is probably, this is as sciencey as it gets, and we're gonna just let Dave go on this slide, but if he goes too far, we're gonna try and pull him back.
All right.
I also can't see the chat. Can anyone else see the chat? Because I can't see if anyone's
Yeah, I've got an eye on it.
Okay, cool. Awesome. All right, Dave, over to you.
All right, to start with, it's an image out of a paper, Water for the Recovery of Climate, that was presented at the 2016 or 17 Paris Climate Talks. It was called Water for the Recovery of Climate. It's a really important paper. You know, if you're a bit of a water nerd, it's like I'd direct you straight towards it. But what it's essentially saying is that on the left-hand side here, where we've got sensible heat, that movement of hot air actually can prevent the progression of precipitation, right? And what it's also saying is the green area there, well, it actually doesn't point it out very clearly in here, but 65% of inland precipitation arrives there because of evapotranspiration. So as a plant's photosynthesizing, it's putting water vapor into the atmosphere. And it's very important to seed the lower atmosphere with water vapor. It's a small water cycle, and it makes up a major component of what we see as inland precipitation. So, I mean, basically, without plants, we're not going to see the rain. This sensible heat moves offshore. It'll evaporate water off the ocean, and it'll basically hold the precipitation system from arriving. That's probably enough, isn't it? You want me to talk about latent heat? I'm sure you want to hear about latent heat, Alan. No, it's all right. Latent heat is the evapotranspiration or evaporation.
Yeah.
Part of the water cycle.
There's another talk that we did at the Sustainable Living Festival last year that really gets into all of this detail, and it has videos and all kinds of interesting stuff. And we didn't want to rehash what we've already talked about. So when I can see the chat again, I'll put the link to our video from last year. We did a video with the Fire Sticks Alliance, and we talked about water and fire in land management in Australia, but I might just move on from that one. I can't remember what's next. Oh yeah.
This is a very, very interesting little topic here. I think this is something that we sort of, I think me and Dave can probably talk between it a little bit. Now I'll chime in where you can. There's a story out there. I'm not sure if this image is directly from this site, but you can find it. It's by Amis Nunu, and it's a story of the Borona fish traps. And you know, it's not my country, so I'm not going to sit here and tell you all about it. But at the very, very essence, the story tells of a time when land was drying, and it talks of. We've got a question quickly. We'll get back to the sensible heat a little bit later on. Apologies for that, but I think this is important. it talks of when the land is drying, and it also shows to a UNESCO World Heritage listed site, a site with 6 or 7 nations associated with it, up in the Barker River, that's still there today. And it's also talks to a songline, and that songline actually runs through the country that I'm on today, Yorta Yorta country. It runs through my country, Wiradjuri country. It runs down to Gunditjamara and Budjabim. It runs out to Gunai Kurnai, and it runs, I've been told, as far as Yongle. That's the story of Miami, and the different names and iterations. And that story, or if you understand songlines have information attached to them. It's once been told to me, think of it as the the hard drive of the bush. It's a way of capturing and storing information and passing it on accurately to the next generation. And one of the interesting things about that songline is there was a specific bit of technology, and that technology is fish traps, that was transferred and passed from river to river, from people to people. And these structures in the waterways have a range of benefits. There's I don't know, you could go on about forever, and for me, I think it's just one of the most fascinating aspects of this work is that really what we're trying to do is not just replicate a natural process, but replicate a process that was understood by people thousands and thousands of years ago, and that was understood on this continent for a very, very long time, and we've lost it in a very, very short time. And I think that that's one of the real visceral aspects of this for me, is that what we're trying to do. When I'll often talk about bringing health to country, or restoring country, or rehydrating country. It's important to recognize why we need to do that, and what's led us here. And it's also important to understand that there are people alive today, traditional owners, and there's people across the basin that do have remnants of this cultural knowledge, and do know where these sites are, and that it should be their voices that really are at the forefront of this work. And it should be acknowledged, if we're drawing things from cultural information, there's aspects of this sort of work that is definitely drawn from cultural information, that we pay respect to that. So I think that's why it's important that we put these images in here. And I think to direct people to go and do their own learning, because the mobs whose country it is, and whose places it is, and stories it is, like, they have been very, very vocal in communicating what it is that they know about these places, and they've been very, very open to sharing it. So Dave, you can probably talk a little bit more to how it's more so relevant to the work, I guess. But I guess that's my 2 cents worth on why we chose to put those images in today.
Oh, it's fantastic, Joe. The fish traps are just amazing. They just make me cold shiver up when I look at them. They're just the most amazing. So anyway, there's Joe, there's been people that have influenced my sort of learning journey. On the time that I spent with Tex Skewthorpe, his nation finishes, well, they're just borders onto the edge of the fish trap, so they held a responsibility for part of his responsibility was the component of the story. The traps was up anyway. And when I started off, a whole bunch of years ago, knocking around with Peter Andrews and doing trail, and I thought to myself, and I'd heard how do I say this? I'd heard that there'd been a component of what Peter does was sort of, he grew up with Aboriginal stockmen on his father's land, and the Aboriginal stockman said to him that white fellas walk all over everything and see nothing. And there's a whole component. What I learned from Peter was really about reading landscapes and a whole bunch of other stuff. But when, I thought there must be an edge, so I started researching fish traps, and I came across the Bawarana traps and read the story about it, and sort of sat with it for ages, sat with this story. And eventually Tex came into my life, and he showed me a lot of stuff. But I went to Tex one day and said, when I read the story of those fish traps, that just reads to me like a story of climate adaptation. It was just, this thing's 40,000 years old. They were running out of water and fish. You know, they thought they'd broken the law. They called upon the first initiated man and his two sons. They came down from the sky world, cast a net across the creek and showed the people where to put the stones, sung up a storm, you know, and the water came back. You know, it's just like, and I've checked in with Tex, I checked in with Bruce Pascoe, and they both agree that that's actually what Tex said to me was, yeah, it's that, but it's not just that, it's many more things than that. But when I asked Bruce, he just, yep, that's a part of the story anyway. That part of the story is about climate adaptation, and these are the things that we can do to change the climate. You know, maybe not fish traps like that, but there's a major scope here that we can access. You
know. I've just looked at the time, so I'm going to try and rush through this. So, you know, the most exciting part of this whole project is the fact that there are the tools available to us. They're not really expensive. You know, you don't have to be able to afford a Tesla or whatever. You don't have to, you know, invent some kind of fancy carbon sequestering technology. Like, we already have the tools. All we need is the people who know how to do it, to spread that knowledge and go out onto country and actually do this sort of work. And it really doesn't take that much to flip the system around and start, you know, having a system that's self-perpetuatingly building instead of self-perpetuatingly depleting.
Can we just go back? Can we go back? Will I cut off your thinking process at the moment, Elle, if I just say something about the left and right of that photo? Already
no.
Go for it.
You're good.
Yeah. Look, the one on the left is in the future, not even in the future, right now, we need to understand how carbon sinks work. And on the left is oxidizing all the carbon back to the atmosphere, right? On the right is closer to what it takes to get carbon back down into the soil and vegetation and everything else. Right? Anyway, there's a bit more to it than that, but basically that's something that jumps out of that slide there. You know, the left hand, if you're seeing country like that, we're releasing carbon dioxide back to the atmosphere. So it's essential that it has vegetation on it.
Well,
also
maybe
for the water cycle.
Maybe you could quickly explain the sensible heat sort of.
Yeah, we could cover off Donna's question. So we were asked, could Dave explain what sensible heat is for the non-water nerds? That's your challenge.
Good on you, Donna. Sensible heat, if you were, as an example, if you were standing at the traffic lights next to a tar road and you were sort of feeling this heat sort of bouncing off, you physically sense it, right? The difference between, I mean, you can physically sense humidity and water vapor as well, but it's called latent heat. So basically the energy into and out of the landscape is properly managed by water vapor. So plants are doing that process. Sensible heat is related to oxidization as well. So it's basically, you've got to change. If you're going to draw down carbon, you actually have to recouple the carbon and water cycle. That's the fancy terms for it, recoupling. They're interlinked. If they're separated, which is what sensible heat will do, you'll oxidize carbon. Yeah, I hope some of that made sense.
I'm going to have a real crack at how I try and sort of think about it. And this might not so much be sensible heat, but it's definitely heat. Go stand in the middle of a paddock and just feel how hot it is. Then walk to the nearest tree and feel the difference in temperature. It's a pretty simple concept, but it works every time. It is always cooler underneath the tree. Now, think about it in terms of dew. We've all heard about dew. It's, the water that just processes night and day. I'm lucky enough where I live, we've got lots of green trees and lots of green grass. And, most days there's a little bit of water sitting on your car each morning. Where I work across the Murray-Darling Basin. I'll go out to places and they don't have any water cycle at all. There's no dew forming. And, looking at this picture from left to right, that's really what we're talking. On the left, you wouldn't expect to have anything like dew occur. On the right, you've got all the plants sitting there creating it. And that's the challenge, is like, how do we bring the landscape back to a point where it's creating its own water? Anyway, have we lost you, Al?
I think I flipped my contact around inside my eye, so looks like I'm crying, but I'm not, so I just took
No stress. Well, no, if you're still with us, and
sorry. Yeah, I might just have to fix that. But anyway, I guess we've got a hand up actually, I think. Hold up. I think it was Kevin. Can you see that?
I saw a hand go up and then it went down again. I think it might have been.
Oh, it went down. Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
We've also got Michelle asking, could you explain the policy difference between swales used to rehydrate the landscape and other earthworks used for floodplain harvesting?
Oh God, that's not floodplain harvesting is like, how do I explain that? We're actually going to show you some images. Now, we're not swalers. Dave has some very dismissive things to say about permacultus. I didn't say it, he did.
Oh, thanks, Joe.
Just throwing him straight in the bucket. No. No, not here to throw stones. But look, I think as we go into the later sections of this presentation, you'll see some of the type of works that we talk about and we actually do. And if you go anywhere across the Womble, the Murrumbidgee, the Galah, out to the Barker, and you look at these huge dams and you look at what these people are doing when they're talking about floodplain harvesting, it's a very, very different thing. So I'm not talking about going out to the rivers and putting in massive offtakes and sucking them dry and sucking the life and spirit out of these rivers. All right. So what's the difference between what we do and floodplain harvesting? You could use the term, if it hadn't have been bastardized by the Liberal National Government of New South Wales, you could use the term floodplain harvesting for what we're talking about. But in our political sphere, it has been so bastardized. They're not floodplain harvesting, they're floodplain murdering and massacring. And that work that they're doing up there on those cotton farms, it's killing people, all right? And I can talk about my own family's health outcomes over generations, and it's not great, but there's a lot of myriad of issues. But I was in Menindee middle of last year, and I was talking to a man, 84 years of age, and he was telling me about the people on his street. Of the 11 people that live on his street, 8 of them are battling terminal cancers, and that's a result of the water quality, the quality of the water that's coming down their river. That's a result of floodplain harvesting and the associated industrial agricultural practices that go along with it. So, yeah, look, I'm not going to sit here and be like, I don't want to go into floodplain harvesting. We got it disallowed in the Senate a couple of days ago, and that was good news. So sorry to go so hard on that, but I think that there is a very, very clear separation. And I think, the one thing is, we're more talking about floodplain processing, I guess. It's like, how do we process water in the landscape to create like life and fertility? Whereas harvesting, how do you extract water, from the floodplain to create a commodity? And I think at its core, we're floodplain processors. We want to get those floodplains processing in life, not harvesting commodities out of them. I would say in the simplest of terms, that's probably how I could define the difference between what we're on about and what our friends up north are trying to do to the rivers.
I guess if I could just say, if a policy was developed where these types of works were available for people to use, which they're the Loon Creek's Institute's having a crack at changing some of the laws around some of this stuff. But if it was available to people to use, there's a scarcity has been sort of built into the system through the historical drainage issues. If we properly repaired the system, there'd be no need for floodplain harvesting because there'd be enough water for them there to do what they needed to do. You know, it's a different. It might be tricky to believe, but we can return water to rivers very easily with this stuff. It's you know, we know where we went wrong, and we know how to recreate the situation to make it right again, and it's available to us. But there's anyway.
Like it's what you said, Dave. Water attracts water, essentially. Like it's a magnet for itself.
It does.
And what we're trying to advocate for is allowing water to be held in a landscape, sure, but just for longer. It's not held until someone has a use for it. It's, you know, it's just held for a longer period of time to let nature sort of take use of it, not like putting tarps at the bottom of dams and like, you know, trying to hold things forever. Anyway, we'll just keep going because the time is going.
I'm just time's going. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Another
Clock's flowing.
All right.
We'll go. If we've got time in the end, we'll come back. So, the best part is that like we're not too far gone, which is I guess where I started the AusRegen journey at, where like I always tell this story where I was deployed to fight forest fires out in eastern Victoria, and I just thought like this is too far gone. There's like nothing we can do now. I've spent my teenage years as like a youth lobbyist, and I've flew myself to Paris for the COP21, and no one's ever listened. But like, you know, we had a chance and now we don't have a chance anymore. The reality is that no, it's not too far gone. We're just been putting our energy in the wrong space. We've been trying to go for, you know, these like up high sort of lofty emission reductions and things like that, which do need to happen. But when we've put our energy like straight into the ground and let it grow, then that's where we get the real results. And people have been getting these kinds of results just quietly as we've all been battling politicians up in big white buildings. So the first one was the Laos Plateau. That was John D. Liu, was it, Dave?
John Dennis Liu, 35,000 kilometres of square, 35,000 square kilometres of desert paid for by the World Bank. Yeah, amazing project. Look at it. Look at the difference from left to right. It's just growing.
Yeah.
Where's that one?
I think this is another John Liu project.
This is Spain, I think.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it must be. Looks a bit Spanish. This one I'm not sure actually, but
looks good to me.
Looks pretty good. This is the Dixie Creek project in Nevada. These photos are 8 years apart, and all they did was take the cattle away from certain parts of the swamp and put in blockages like beavers would. Actually, I think there were beavers in there in the end. They came back. But it's pretty impressive for 8 years of just letting it sort of go after they did a couple of interventions and then left it. This is the Yanjip project.
Beavers are the bomb. We should be international breeding program and release them everywhere and put us all out of a job. They would.
Yeah, I don't know how beavers would go here, though. But we've got human beavers that can do similar sort of things, which is what we're trying to be. The Yanjip project in WA. And then our own project, our first ever AusRegen project in Patenga in New South Wales in the Thora Valley.
Kambanuga country.
So before it was kind of just a dry gully. And after we put this structure in, the landscape was able to hold water again and sort of recreate a bit of a wetland. And Dave, I really like this is the first time that I ever saw these sort of things in the flesh. And I remember being really amazed that you knew where to put the structure, because I mean there's like plenty of culverts all over the property and there's plenty of roads and all of that, but you knew that this one would work. And I'd be interested to know like sort of your thought process and how you read the landscape to figure this out.
I guess that's a low-hanging fruit, that one. It's not necessarily, in terms of reading the landscape, it may not necessarily be where you would naturally put one, but it is a sort of low-hanging fruit, sort of obvious one, where it's quite simple to construct that wall in front of it like we have. I'm not sure how well we can see that, but in the before photo there we go, yeah. So we've just constructed that wall in front of the pipe and then piled up a bunch of material, soil, basically, soil and clay in behind the wall, tapered back down. And, that, I guess that's an easy one, Al, in terms of, the moment you see a culvert like that, it says, build a wall in front of me and rehydrate that ground behind. It's just too easy, it really is. And it's a classic example of an intervention that we probably had 200 or 300 mil of rain within a short time after building that, and it just literally they fill up overnight. Where it was bare ground, you've got, because that goes for quite a distance behind. That's filled up with water for a fair way behind it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one of the best things is you do one intervention, but you're really hydrating everything that's come before that point as well. So really, for like bang for buck, for like the amount of effort they actually put in, you get this huge amount of change behind it.
I guess when I looked at these earlier, I thought to myself, if maybe not the best example, but a Murray-Darling system doesn't have much of a fall in it. So what it means is we can put structures in, and because we may put a structure in one place, but because of the very sort of gradual fall in the landscape, it may well fill up for kilometres behind it. Anyway.
We'll keep moving.
Keep moving, yeah.
These are South Farthing, not Ullapanel, but
Oh, sorry, if I labeled these wrong. Sorry.
This is Ullapanel right here.
That's Ullapanel, yeah.
Yeah. So South Farthing was a little passion project. It's where I'm lucky enough to live, and Dave came and spent a couple of weeks up there, and we had erosion problems in the valley. Well, I guess the creek that runs through the edge of the property. A lot of the erosion problems that we had were a mix of things. Up until about 15-20 years ago, the property had been grazed quite heavily. We were lucky that it still had a fair bit of vegetation. You go around and you look at some of the trees in the area, and there are some quite old trees sitting on the edge of this stream. But one of the concerns was that we were going to start losing them, and they were going to start falling into the stream as a result of erosion and undercuts. And so, Dave being the miracle worker that he is, it was a moment myself, my partner, my brother-in-law, and my partner's family, her mother and whatnot. We started at the bottom of the stream, and mind you, at this point we'd spent an entire 2020's worth of lockdowns trying to fix this stream ourselves. We thought we had it. We'd had a little bit of the theory, and myself, my partner, and her brother were we thought that we wanted one structure every meter. For some reason, that was the rule of thumb that I had in my head. And so we had these little sort of 10 centimeter, 10 stones per structure, roughly every meter, the whole way through about 600 or 700 meters worth of stream. And we were pretty impressed with what we'd done. We'd taken these fast little rapid sort of things, and we'd made these little pools with maybe 6 or 7 centimeters worth of water in them. Well, Dave came along and said that we didn't have enough of a vision, and that we had maybe been a little bit lacking in our ambition for what could be done. And so all of a sudden, we started condensing these structures into maybe one every 10 or 15 meters. I think it's at the moment. And starting at the bottom of the property, when we put the first structure in place, it filled like as we were putting it in. I'm lucky I live in a very, very wet catchment, the Kiva Valley, Doodarowa country, and it filled as we were doing the work. So we'd put a layer in and it would fill, and would back it in and it would fill. And all of a sudden you've got this massive sort of body of water. You've got this constant flow running through. And I'm like, oh, wow, we've created the chain of ponds. And again, me not realizing that this is just the start of the process. And one of the things you'll see in there is a lot of the soil and sediment that's built up behind these structures. And that's, we had undercuts that were nearly 1/2 meter into the edge of the bank, and at points 1 meter deep, and those undercuts are now full of soil. You can see on the image on the right hand side there's a tree root. Now that tree root, when we first started the work, it was about 1 foot above the level of the water running through. That tree root now sits about 1 foot of the tree root is covered in soil that is being captured by the structure and the movement of water through the place. And I think that it was just, at the end of the day, it was just a couple of blokes hanging out by a stream going, put one there, put one there. Oh, can you jump in the ute, go get us from more stone from the bloke down the road? All right, no worries. We'll go get some more stone from the bloke down the road. All right, well, we'll put those there and we'll put this there. And it was just a very cathartic process. Like, it was you talk about those like connecting journeys. Me and my partner's brother had never had the greatest of relationships before we spent this time in the creek together, working together on, and that's brought us together. And as well as just the transfer of knowledge, of 2 to 3 weeks on 600 or 700 meters, my confidence in what could be done, and also my ability to read the landscape. I'm still just a journeyman. I'm nowhere near an expert, and I found it a really, really a rewarding process. And I think that the health is there in the landscape. You can see green in places where we were losing and eroding soil from, and I'm now no longer concerned that some of these big gum trees on the edge of this stream are going to fall over, because they've been plugged. The back pressure's there, the soil's there, that this section of creek now holds itself together. And the way I like to say it, I live in the greenest catchment in the basin, and I've spent a fair bit of time traveling around the basin. I'm pretty sure I've got the greenest property in the greenest catchment in the basin. So that's the claim. That's how good I think this methodology is that we made South Farthing the best of the best, or the wettest of the wettest. And I'm pretty sure we can do that to more places too.
Yeah. I'm going to skip to the next one. Davis, is you, which should have been labelled Yellow Panel.
Same slide still, Ellen.
Is
That's
it?
I might not have switched over for you, Dave, but this is the leaky weir at Eula Panel, the sort of the two-phase construction. And I think it's to promote it. One of the things I think
I've got it.
Yeah. Tell us why. Like, how did this come together, Dave? Like, why did you? Where are you? Where's this structure, and how did it come to be?
Well, Eula Panel is an Aboriginally owned property up in the New South Wales Central Coast, and I've got I had a fairly long-standing sort of relationship with the property and the people on it. They were quite sort of trustworthy of what it is that we were setting out to do there. So a friend of mine came along, basically, and he was quite wealthy and afforded to pay for all of that rock that you see in there. So I had 172 tonne of sandstone delivered to the top driveway of the property, and then over a period of time spent a fair bit of time dragging all that rock down in tractors and whatnot, and piling it all up in the creek in the right places. This is one. When I started on that was dry. There was no water in that river at all. I could walk from one end of the property to the other and not get there was some stinky old puddles of sort of pretty sick-looking water in there. So I went through and built probably, this is probably one of about 6 or 7 structures. I built a couple of wetlands on the way through as well. So in this, I'm getting sidetracked. So, this is the top end of the property, just one of the structures.
How long did it take you to do the work?
I did it all on my own. This was an 18-month process, really. So, it was quite a lot of work, that's my university, Joe. So this is where I go to sort of hone the skills, and to really sort of to make sure I know what it is that I'm going on about. One of the really there was a period of dry time, so I went through and put all these structures through over that time we were in drought, and then when the droughts broke, it literally, there was maybe 2 lots of 60 mil of rain in the headwaters above, and I was there and watched and listened to this thing just fill up from the top of the system all the way down, and it's remained a running river ever since. Water just used to slide through it and take off out to sea, and now it actually feeds the properties below it, just leaking water out through the dry time. It's really quite interesting. I don't think we've got it here in these photos, but just off to one side of where this photo is taken, there's a floodplain area. And when I really knew that I'd had some significant impacts on things, this system filled up with water. Also, I was harvesting some material out of the floodplain one day with a tractor, and I went in there to dig out a pile of material, and water rushed into the hole. Right? That was the new water table. I had to sort of back out of there really quite quickly with the tractor.
So what you're saying is you raised the water table, that whole water table you filled right up.
The water that's in the river holds a positive pressure against any water that's in the landscape. So if it rains on the floodplain, it can't leak back into the river. It can. This is how rivers used to run during the dry times. It was the water that leaked out of the floodplain that kept the rivers running during the dry time. So you've got to lower the water. If you want the water to run out of the floodplain, you've got to lower the water in the pond. They're both connected to one another. So
now, just conscious of time, I don't know if the Zoom ends at 4 p.m. Obviously, if anyone was expecting us to end now, I do apologize. We're probably, I would say, maybe another 10 or so minutes of yarning, and we will open up to questions after that. So we won't hold it against you if you do need to go. I don't think it's scheduled to shut down. So I guess vote with your feet if you're happy to keep on listening on and having listened to us have a yarn about how good it has been in the stream. Maybe stick around. Is that all right, Elle?
Well, there's also going to be the recording as well, but I've just kept an eye on the questions, and it doesn't seem like there's any more questions. But I'll just see what's next. Oh yeah.
A little bit more yellow now.
More of these. Oh, this is your property again, Joe, isn't it?
South Farthing.
No, that's Ulipinel.
No, this is South Farthing. The one before was Ulipinel. This one, again, was an interesting one. You can't quite see the mark, but there's a fern or Dixonia over the back edge. And when we first started putting the structure in, we sort of, the roots were all exposed on that Dixonia. And me and my brother-in-law sort of looked at each other and went, man, if we could get it halfway up that Dixonia, that'd be awesome. Well, anyway, all of those roots are now underneath the soils that have been captured by the by the structures you see in the middle there. And we went about a foot higher than we thought would be like the upper level ambition. So again, I think that's one of the real things in this work is, don't be afraid to have ambition with it. Like, you can fix rivers, you can fix streams, and it's not hard. It does take a little bit of expertise. Gaining that expertise is hard, but finding people with it isn't. There are those wealths of information out there, and then I guess you really got to take action while the action can be taken. And it's one of those things I think about often. Every rainfall event, you've gotten to the next rainfall event to get your stream ready for the erosive forces that are coming. So there's a missed opportunity every day that we or every rainfall event that we let go past, that we haven't prepared our waterways to receive it. And that's some of the water that we've had through there, like you can see it on the right hand side, like it's quite forcefully sort of pushing through there, and it's a little bit murky, but within a day or two of the rains clearing, it's a crystal clear pond. Like I go out and I fill my water bottle up straight from it. Like you can drink straight from this like water source. It's it's a it really is a phenomenal place. Whereas at 2 years ago, it was 3 or 4 centimeters and just rushing through, scouring the bottom and taking it all downstream. So anyway, on to the next slide, Al.
There's lots of these photos, but maybe
it's actually really great. I apologise. I was just going to say it was really great to be able to do that with you, Joe.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the like, as a shared experience, it's and you can see it on the side. I think the photo on the right, I don't know, there's one on the left, those 2 big trees, like they were the ones that we were concerned about losing, and that's now no longer a concern. That's that whole process. That bank is now shored up and it's building as opposed to eroding, which is amazing. And this is one of the things too on the image on the right that you can kind of see is you're seeing how the structure traps and captures sediments, and Dave can probably talk to that a little bit more than I can, but the water is coming out cleaner on the other side. And I think that that's such a water quality is something that's so important. We were talking about how wetlands earlier are the kidneys and whatnot of the system. It's really interesting, like for what quality do you want your water? And some people want it for stock and domestic purposes. Like that's, oh well, if you can feed me horse from it, how good's that? Whereas from a First Nations perspective, when we talk about quality water, and there's an obligation that you pass quality water on to the next nation along, but that water's of a quality for creation. Like that is like the standard of quality that we're going for. Like could you make, or would you make a child from that water? Like, and this sweet water that we get coming out of the mountains, you would. Whereas by the time you go 100 k's, follow along where this stream runs into the river and where that river runs into Lake Hume, by the time it gets to Lake Hume, that water is no longer really of quality. Like it's brown and it's murky, and it's really at that point it's for stock and domestic. And I think that we really need to shift what it is that we want from our waterways and our rivers. Like we want quality water, we want sweet water.
I'll keep going through these guys, sorry.
Yeah, skip through the videos. They were in
good.
case we didn't yarn on enough. That was if we needed to fill time. These videos we're skipping through, they're all available on YouTube. If you go and search Leaky Weir on YouTube or AusRegen on YouTube, you'll come to a couple of really informative videos of the team up on the Patanga property, going through what the design process is behind building these structures, how you choose the locations, and what it actually looks like when you get a team of people out there putting the work in. And that's really one of the things we wanted, I guess, to emphasize, is that opportunity to put the work in. We've got, I guess, here comes the pitch. There's always a pitch. Yeah, but look, what we really do.
Can I just say
Dave,
something, Joe? I think it says something about what we're about, mate. We're actually really trying to bring up community as much as we're majorly interested in the climate component and the restoration of landscapes, but we also want to actively engage with community about this stuff. It's I mean, our issues in terms of bringing in funding money to get this stuff done and all those sorts of things. But that says something about our motivation, I think.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I was told, a couple of years ago when I decided to go and find out a little bit more about water, and spoke to a Yorta Yorta elderly Joe Acom. And it was one of the first things that he said to me is that we, as First Nations people, understand that there's a connection between healthy country and healthy society. When you have healthy country, you have a healthy society. When you have an unhealthy country, you have an unhealthy society. And I think go and have a drive around country right now, and you can make your own assessment as to whether or not we're a healthy society. Doesn't mean that there's not people or places that are healthy, but the potentiality is huge, and in so many different ways. And that last slide that Elle just took down, that butterfly effect, I was about to talk to that a little bit, but that's really, at the start, what we said was we wanted to show you that there's, it doesn't need to be, big lobbying actions against politicians or, out there convincing, oh mate, he doesn't need to drive his V8. Like, yeah, that stuff needs to happen and it will happen over time. But think globally, act locally. That's such but a catchphrase. But what does acting locally look like? Well, for us, it starts with waterway restoration. What does that do? That rehydrates the soil. That supports plant growth. Plant growth restores the biotic pump, and that sequesters excess carbon. So, this is real tangible work, and it doesn't need to be done with us. Like, if you can go out there and you can find a degraded waterway and you can fix it, like, power to you. Like, that's like, there are so many positive benefits that will cascade down from doing this work. And what we would like to get out of, I guess, this Sustainable Living Festival talk, and whether or not that's the people on this call or people that are listening to it post recording, so you've got a slight window. It's between now and March 18th. We're running a weekend. It's called Regen Fest. Now Regen Fest is out on Jar Jar Wurrung country, a property called Bunjil Farm. The point of Regen Fest is we're hoping to get around 50 people together. We're going to spend 2 to 3 days in a degraded stream, trying to bring it back to health, similarly to how you've seen Eula Panel and how you've seen South Farthing and Patanga up and above. In the Ellie's going to play the promo for us, but it's the opportunity to do this work is immense, and we need people and we need teams. Like, that's at the end of the day, like, yeah, and we need funding and we need the rest of it, but it's people. Like, people will bring this together. The more people that are willing to look at a place like you're seeing now on the screen and go like, I'm not happy if that is the state of country. Like, I care, and I want to change that. I don't just want to go onto Facebook and rant about how, oh no, this is happening or that's happening. Like, there's so much out there that you can get angry about, but there's also so much out there that you can do. So, you can either live in a place of fear and anger and despair. And look, I spend a lot of time traveling around the place, and there's so much that I see that makes me angry. But at the same time, I also know that there's so much that I can be doing to change what it is that makes me angry about the state of the country right now. And I think that's one of the key messages or the key takeaways that that we as a team would like to sort of pass on, is that there is something that you can do. What you do matters. And at the very least, like, if all you do is 600 meters of creek line on a 5-acre property, well, all of a sudden there's birds that will drink from that. There's kangaroos that'll drink from that. The crays will come out. You're all of a sudden, you're intrinsically linked with these aspects of biodiversity. It's not just a biodiversity crisis sitting off somewhere on a Facebook post. Like, it's like, well, yeah, there's a crisis, but I went out there and I helped and I made a difference. And that march of red desertification that we were talking about earlier between the maps, if you go and you look, Google Maps, put the layers onto satellite images and you have a look around, everywhere you go, there's green next to red, and it's always a choice. There is nowhere that is red that doesn't have an area near it that's green. It is always an intentional choice as to whether or not a property is red or green. It's a very, very simple. Like, you can even see it in this photo here. Half of it's green, half of it's red. All right. Like, and the half that's red, it's got like foreign plants on it. Like, it's a very, very, very simple aspect. And anyway, I don't want to bang on it. I feel like I'm going on a tangent, but my tangent is like, you can do something. Like, you are a powerful individual, and like, what you do matters. So choose to do things that matter. And I guess any questions is probably where we're at, unless Elle or Dave, you've got anything to say.
I've just been scrolling through.
Well, I think that sort of lends us to the last question, which is, AusRegen is a couple of years old now. We've been sort of collaborating for a couple of years, but we are really trying to now build our team. It's been us three plus a few more, and more recently a couple of really amazing people have come on board, but I feel like we're now really confident with the methodologies, and we're confident that we can sort of roll this out on a bigger scale, and that's what needs to happen. But we're looking for ideas that can really scale up these projects. We don't want to be an organization who charges like a heap of money for this sort of knowledge. Like, we think that this knowledge should, everyone should be able to access it and utilize it, because it's everyone's business to make our environment better for the next generation. And I guess what we really want to know is if there is anyone out there with any ideas or like sort of experience in scaling up these kinds of operations, then we'd really love to hear from anyone who'd like to come on board and help out with that. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Joe.
It's pretty simple. If you've got time, commit it. If you've got money, send it. I don't mean to make it about dollars and cents. It's not what we're about. But look, that's the reality of the world we live in. And you know, it's look, the potentiality is there. You know, and there's people all look. I talk about a pretty large but pretty small section of the world. Like the Murray-Darling Basin feels like, you know, my area of influence. It's where I can make a change. I think there's a lot of change to be made there, and there's also like a lot of problems. You know, like just so many. Like, you know, you can write a list of them, and you could spend a lifetime trying to solve them all individually. But you know, we're talking about a pretty simple thing. Like most people can agree that there's like problems in our land and water management across this basin, that there's ways that it can be better managed, and that there's so much potential for the individual to come on board and to make change. And you know, whether that's, oh, I know somebody who, you know, has a farm that has a degraded creek line on it. You know, why don't we have a chat to them and see if we can get a team out there to, you know, to try and rectify that? Or you know, I drive past this place every day and I can see the problems that you guys are talking about in terms of erosion, but it's on council land. Well, why doesn't that council empower their local traditional owners to come and, you know, and to rectify that? You know, there's so many different ways that this problem can be solved, but nobody is talking about how to solve it. Like that's, you know, the thing for me is I work in the water space and we spend a lot of time talking about water. And whenever you talk to government about water, they seem so far off the mark in terms of what needs to be done. And you know, I don't know what the answer is. What I do know is that if you're interested in sequestering carbon, if you're interested in supporting biodiversity, if you're interested in sustainable agriculture, like long-term farm economic prosperity, like we need water on this continent to sustain life. Like that's pretty simple. And we need to empower people, not just us. Like, and this is what me and Ella often say, is if there was somebody else out there doing this and we could see them doing it effectively, we would happily retire tomorrow. Like I don't have some like messiah complex. I would rather be at home playing Xbox or playing footy with my weekends. Like, don't get me wrong. Like we would really
I wish
like
someone else was doing this because I would go to their camps and I wouldn't have to organize these projects.
yeah. It's I wish the problem was managed, but it's not. And you know, it's a long road, and I'm confident that we can, you know, we can get to where we want to go, but we need to be taking steps to get there. And that's really, you know, if you're sitting there listening, like, you know, that's the call. It's like, you know, come on the journey. If you're doing something similar, tell us about it so we can get excited about it. Like, you know, it's such a big space, it's such a big basin, and that's the thing. I've only talking about the basin. By the time you talk about it across the scale of this continent, and by the time you look at that scale into the other continents as well, like it is such a huge problem. Like it puts shivers down my spine. So it's like, well, let's forget about the big problem. Let's focus on one structure at a time. You know, that's even maybe a little bit too stressful. One rock at a time. Like it's pretty easy when you just carting a rock down into the creek. Like, you know, that's pretty doable task. So yeah, that and you know, if you're interested in hires, if you want to come along and see what these works look like. Otherwise, I think that's that.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, we're 15 minutes over, so thanks to everyone who stuck around. I put those links in the chat. Thank you so much to Mylene, who's sent us through some links and some ideas. Gary, thank you so much for the message and for being here. And then also I did see I did see some other messages coming in that I can't see now. So I must have done something to them. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, hopefully we'll get to meet you in person sometime at a project, or, you know, reach out on Facebook, or we're just AusRegen@gmail.com if you have an email. And yeah, spread the word.
Thanks very much, everyone.
And don't forget
Thanks,
to get in the
thanks.
stream. Too much talking, not enough spending time in the stream is bad for your health.
Absolutely.
And when we say stream, we mean an actual live stream, not a live stream, like a living stream out there.
Not a digital stream like what we're all
Mm.
subjected everyone to for the last hour. Yeah, Kate, we definitely do need to get our poly enthused. If you know any, let us know.
What was that?
Oh, Kate put in a comment. She said, sounds like you need to get a poly along and enthused. Oh, Brian needs to go. Thanks, Brian. We'll put the recording up for you.
Sounds like we're done.
I think so. I think it's time to press end.
Yeah, okay. I'll stop recording.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Goodbye, but not farewell.
Absolutely.